Hi, my name's Emily Parker, 23 years old, and this story begins on the very night of my graduation, a moment that should have been the pinnacle of pride, but instead turned into a direct stab to the heart. Beneath the warm lights of the restaurant and half-hearted congratulations, my father laughed in front of the entire table and said, "Now you're old enough to start paying rent or move out." No praise, no acknowledgement for 4 years of studying and working, sending money home to help the family. Just an ultimatum wrapped in laughter. They had no idea that only 24 hours later, I would walk out of that house, move into a new home under my own name, and cut off all the financial support I had been quietly providing for the past 3 years. And when I sent them the message to inform them, their faces instantly changed because my withdrawal would set off a chain of consequences they had never imagined. If you've ever had your joy turned into a joke by your own family, or been bound by guilt they've used against you, watch until the end of this story. You'll see why sometimes the strongest choice isn't to hold on, but to let go. And tell us where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. My family consists of just 4 people. My father, my mother, me, and my younger brother, Ryan, who's 3 years younger than I am. But from the moment I was old enough to understand, I knew my place in that house was never equal to his. Ryan was always the favored child, from the way my parents looked at him to what they gave him. When Ryan turned 16, my parents bought him a brand new, shiny red car with the excuse, "So you can get to school easily and work part-time to gain experience." His entire college tuition was paid in full, his spending money was deposited regularly into his account each month, and whatever he wanted was almost instantly his. As for me, the moment I entered college, my father told me flat out, "You're smart enough to take care of yourself. Scholarships and part-time jobs are more than enough. We have to save money for Ryan, he needs the opportunity to succeed." All fint. It might have sounded like he was praising my independence, but in reality, it was more like a convenient excuse to avoid supporting me in any way. I worked multiple shifts at a cafe, took tutoring jobs in the summer, and was lucky enough to have a full-ride scholarship. Even so, every month I still sent part of my earnings home to help pay for the electricity, water, internet, and other household expenses. My parents never mentioned it directly to me, but if anyone asked, they would say, "Emily doesn't cost us anything to live here, she even helps us out." At first glance, it sounded like they were acknowledging me, but in truth, my contributions were never truly valued. They were simply treated as something I was supposed to do. I had been used to this since I was a child. When I was 8, my parents bought Ryan a brand new green bicycle with a ringing bell and a front basket, simply because he had just learned to ride on 2 wheels. My bike, which had been newly bought for me, was immediately handed over to Ryan, and I was given an old, worn-out bike from a cousin. When I asked why, my mother casually said, "Your brother needs a better bike so it's easier for him to practice. You're older now, you can manage." On holidays like Christmas or birthdays, Ryan always got brand new presents still in their boxes, while I usually received clothes from last season's clearance sale or hand-me-downs from my mother's friends' kids. As a child, I didn't fully understand, I just felt sad and left out. But the older I got, the more I realized it was a series of deliberate choices, and I was always the one getting less. Even in high school, my parents made me give up my own bedroom so Ryan could have a better space to study. I was moved into the smaller room that had been used for storage, and it took me a whole week to clean it out enough to live in. Ryan, meanwhile, got the larger room, a new desk, and a new computer. They told me, "Girls don't need a big room, as long as it's quiet." But the quiet they talked about was really just a cramped corner where I had to squeeze in my books and an old computer, while Ryan had every convenience possible. People on the outside might think I'm exaggerating, that every parent loves their children in their own way. But when love is handed out with conditions, and those conditions always tilt toward one side, the person on the other side knows exactly what it feels like to be left behind. To my parents, I was the child they didn't have to worry about. And Ryan was the project worth investing in. And that idea of investment meant I had to sacrifice not only my time and effort but also the small opportunities that could have been for myself. During my college years, it became even more obvious. I lived in a cramped dorm, ate frugally, and covered my own expenses for books and transportation. Meanwhile, Ryan was set up in a private apartment just minutes from his campus, fully furnished, with my parents paying his parking fees and buying him a premium gym membership. I remember once asking my mother why there was such a difference, and she simply smiled and said, "Your brother is still young and doesn't know how to save, so we have to take care of him first. You can manage on your own." It sounded reasonable, but beneath it was the truth that they never intended to share their resources fairly. What exhausted me the most wasn't the favoritism itself, but the fact that they treated it as if it were normal. No one apologized, no one explained, no one even considered that I might be hurt. Everything was summed up in the phrase, "You're strong, you can handle it." But being strong doesn't mean you don't feel anything, and being able to endure doesn't mean you have to endure forever. I had learned to grit my teeth and finish everything without expecting anything from them. Still, sending money home every month was something I kept doing because I thought, after all, this is still my family. I never expected that this small act of concession would convince them I would always remain in that position, the one who shoulders the burden without asking for anything in return. I think the audience will understand when I say that unfairness isn't just about who gets what, but about how people diminish your value and your effort. For me, the words "pay rent" or "get out" at my graduation dinner weren't just a cruel joke. They were a mirror reflecting more than 20 years of being placed on the lower rung in my own home. And what they couldn't have imagined was that this time, I would not stay silent. Just a few days before that graduation night, I had experienced two moments that, for anyone else, might have been the greatest milestones of their life. That morning, I received an email from a major tech corporation informing me that I had been offered the position I had dreamed of for years, with a starting salary higher than anyone else in my graduating class. I must have read the line, "We are pleased to welcome you to our team," several times, my heart pounding with both joy and relief. 4 years of relentless studying, working myself to exhaustion, and sacrificing every last bit of youthful fun had finally brought me here to a brand new beginning I had built entirely on my own. Before I could even finish processing that happiness, that afternoon I signed another contract. The purchase agreement for my very first home. It was a small, 2-bedroom house with a gray shingle roof, a backyard just big enough to plant a few flower beds, in a quiet neighborhood less than a 15-minute drive from my new workplace. I had saved every penny for the past 4 years, along with an inheritance from my grandmother, money she had deliberately set aside for me in her will and never disclosed to my parents. To her, I had always been the considerate grandchild who could take care of herself, but she also knew all too well that being able to take care of yourself sometimes meant being left on your own. Now, this house was my ticket out of the cycle of injustice I had been living in since childhood. I had planned to keep those 2 pieces of news to myself, at least until I found the right moment. But the moment I stepped into that Italian restaurant that night, I knew this wasn't going to be an evening of congratulations. The atmosphere at the table was lively at first, relatives and a few family friends chatting, complimenting the food, catching up with one another. I sat in the middle, forcing a smile, responding politely to each small talk question. One of my aunts asked what I planned to do next, and I answered softly that I'd be starting a new job at a large company right here in the city, and that I was also looking for a place nearby to make commuting easier. I hadn't even finished my sentence before my father, sitting at the head of the table, cut me off without even glancing at me. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, his voice a mix of teasing and command. "That's good. Starting next month, you can begin paying rent or move out. We can't keep supporting an adult forever." His quiet laugh followed, and then my mother and Ryan joined in, as if it were nothing more than a harmless joke. But to me, it wasn't a joke. That sentence crushed whatever faint hope I'd had that tonight might be a moment for them to acknowledge the effort I had put in. I caught the fleeting pause in a few relatives' eyes before they quickly looked away. No one said anything, as if my father's words were perfectly reasonable. Ryan took a sip of water, shook his head, and smirked, adding, "I'm guessing you'll pick moving out, so you won't have to split expenses with anyone." My mother nodded, half joking and half serious. "That's how you grow up, dear." I set my fork down, my hands tightening in my lap to keep my reaction in check. In my mind, memories of every time I had to give something up, every quiet transfer of money home, every opportunity I had to forego, all stacked on top of each other. And I knew this was the end. I didn't intend to defend myself. I didn't need to explain anything to people who had grown accustomed to undervaluing me. They had told me I could take care of myself so many times that they believed I would always be there to carry the weight without resistance. But this time was different. I had a new job, a new home, and most importantly, a plan to step out of this orbit and never return. So I simply smiled, took a sip of water, and continued listening to the baseball conversation at the other end of the table, as if their words hadn't touched me at all. But, inside, I had already decided that in just one more day, I would be gone with no warning, no reconciliation script. And when that happened, they would be the ones to face the emptiness and the consequences they had helped create. The next morning, while the whole house was still deep in sleep after the long evening at the restaurant, I was up at 5 a.m. The early summer light slipped through the thin curtains, casting a glow over the stack of cardboard boxes I had quietly prepared in advance. Every step I took on the wooden floor was as light as possible, not because I was afraid of waking anyone, but because I wanted to leave in absolute calm. I packed my belongings one by one into the boxes: clothes, books, a few framed photos of my grandmother, my laptop, and some personal items I had bought with my own money. Everything else, things that belonged to the household or had been given by the family, I left exactly where they were. At exactly 7 a.m., the small moving truck I had booked the day before pulled up in front of the house. The driver, a middle-aged man with a kind smile, helped me load each box onto the truck. No one in the house came out to watch or ask questions. They were still asleep. I knew that when they woke up, my room would be completely empty, with only the bed and wardrobe left behind. I stood in the doorway, taking one last look around. This had once been the space I called my room, but, in reality, it was only a temporary place to stay between times when I was told to give it up or strip it down for someone else's comfort. Now, it was just a four-walled room, stripped of any meaning. We drove for about 30 minutes before arriving at my new neighborhood. My house sat at the end of a red brick paved street, shaded by rows of trees on both sides. It had a gray shingle roof, cream-colored walls, and a low white wooden fence surrounding it. The front door was painted a soft ocean blue, noticeable but not loud, giving off a sense of calm from the very first glance. On the side of the house was a path leading to the backyard, where I planned to plant lavender and a few rose bushes my grandmother had always loved. Inside, the living room felt airy and full of light thanks to the large windows. Warm walnut wood floors, soft beige walls, and an open kitchen connected to the living room with a small bar counter, just enough for me to cook and invite friends over. There were 2 bedrooms, one for myself and one as a workspace and library. The house wasn't large, but everything in it was mine, a feeling I hadn't experienced in all of my 23 years. After arranging the main boxes inside, I sat down at the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of water, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was call the electric, water, and internet companies, the 3 services I had been quietly paying for at my parents' house over the past 3 years. I informed them of my address change and requested to cancel services at the old address. The power company representative asked, "Are you sure you want to cut it off completely? The account at that address has been under your name for a long time." I smiled and replied, "Yes, I'm sure. From today on, I won't be paying a single bill for that address anymore." Hanging up, I felt as if I had just set down a burden I had been carrying for far too long. Next, I logged into my bank account and canceled every automatic payment connected to the old house. The homeowner's insurance, the winter gas bill, and even the maintenance fees I had secretly covered to keep my parents from complaining about unexpected costs. With each click of cancel, I felt another strand of the rope tying me to that old injustice slowly snap. Finally, I opened the family group chat on my phone. I typed each word slowly, making sure my tone was calm and concise. I won't be living at the house anymore, and will stop paying the bills starting this month. Wish you all the best. No explanations, no apologies, no roundabout phrasing. I hit send, set my phone down on the table, then walked over to the living room window and pulled back the curtain. Morning sunlight poured in, flooding the entire room with brightness. In that moment, I realized I had just stepped out of a cycle that had held me captive for nearly my entire life. And the most ironic part was they still had no idea how much this was about to change everything. Less than an hour after I sent the message to the family group chat, my phone began to vibrate nonstop. The first call was from my mother. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Immediately, the second call came, then the third, then the fourth, all from the same number. Each time it rang, I glanced at the screen, set it back down without answering. In under 10 minutes, I had more than 10 missed calls. Interspersed were frantic messages. Where are you? What do you mean by stopping the bills? Come home right now, we need to talk. An hour later, my father joined in on the attack. His first text was short, "This is the family home, you can't just abandon it." The second was sharper. "Don't act like a child. You have a responsibility to the place that raised you." I read each line with a bitter taste in my mouth. All my life I had shouldered responsibilities for them, and they had never once called it responsibility until the moment they lost it. I decided not to answer any of their calls or messages. I wanted my silence to speak for me. For the next 24 hours, I focused on setting up my new home, arranging the furniture, hanging a few art pieces I'd bought at last weekend's craft market. I went grocery shopping, bought a new set of glasses, and picked up a few potted plants for the windowsills. Every time my phone buzzed, I glanced at the screen and went right back to what I was doing. I knew that the less I responded, the more unsettled they would become. The next morning, as I was making coffee, another message from my mother came in, this time with a tone of panic. "The power at the house was cut off this morning, and the internet isn't working either. What did you do?" I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth slide down my throat, and almost instantly a wave of relief mixed with quiet satisfaction washed over me. I didn't need to do anything extra. Everything had simply returned to where it belonged, to a place where I was no longer the silent sponsor for a family that had always looked down on me. By noon, my father sent another message. "The power company says the account is in your name. You need to turn it back on immediately." I stared at those words and remembered all the times I had quietly paid the bills on time, so the house would never be without electricity or internet. Not once did they ask why the bills were always settled so quickly, or whose name the accounts were under. They simply assumed those services existed because that's just how it is. And now, with that normal suddenly gone, they were finally beginning to realize who they had been relying on for the past 3 years. That afternoon, a mutual family friend texted me. "Your parents just called to ask if they could use our internet for a while. Sounds like they're having some trouble." I smiled and didn't reply. I didn't take any joy in their struggles, but I no longer felt any obligation to rescue them from the consequences of how they had treated me. Late that night, I received one last message from my mother. "You have no idea how much trouble this is causing. If you don't turn the services back on, we will," and it stopped there, unfinished. Maybe she had intended to write something like, "never forgive you," or "cut you off," but those threats no longer carried any weight for me. I locked my phone, set it down, and went back to my dinner in my new kitchen, under the warm glow of the yellow light, a light I had created myself and would never let anyone extinguish. On Tuesday afternoon, just 2 days after the power and internet at the old house had been cut off, I was watering the lavender pots on my porch when a familiar SUV pulled up in front of the gate. The car door swung open, my father stepped out first, my mother following close behind, both their faces drawn with tension and fatigue. The moment I saw them, I could already guess why they were here. They must have asked the old neighbors or a relative I still kept in touch with. However, they had found me. Their appearance meant they were determined to track me down. They stood at the low white wooden fence, peering in as if trying to imagine what the inside looked like. I wiped my hands on the small towel hanging by the door, opened the gate, and invited them in, my voice calm, so calm it surprised even me. Inside, the house was neat and bright. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows, spilling across the warm walnut floors. The scent of coffee from the machine in the kitchen still lingered in the air. My mother's eyes swept across the living room, taking in the beige sofa set, the oak bookshelves, and the few paintings on the walls. She let out a quiet sigh, as if trying to swallow some unspoken feeling. My father stood with his arms crossed, but his eyes couldn't hide the surprise at seeing how comfortably I was living. "Emily," my father began, his voice softer than usual. "About what happened on your graduation night. I was just joking. You know that, right?" Everyone was in a good mood. I didn't think you'd take it to heart. I looked him straight in the eye and said nothing. My mother quickly jumped in, her tone gentle. "Sweetheart, we're family. You shouldn't stay upset over just one comment. We can talk things through." I took a deep breath and gestured for them to sit down. "If you want to talk, then let's talk, but this time I'm going to say everything." I began listing things, one by one, clearly and without leaving out a single detail. I reminded them of the time I had to give up my own bedroom so Ryan could have a better space to study while I was moved into the storage room. The time when I first started college, juggling 3 part-time jobs to pay for books and food, while Ryan was set up in his own apartment with every expense covered. I spoke about all the years I sent money to help with the electric, water, and internet bills without ever hearing a single thank you, only being told, "You're strong, you can handle it." My mother shifted in her seat, trying to interrupt, but I held up my hand to signal I wasn't finished. I continued. "And then that night, right in the middle of my graduation dinner, a day that should have been a source of pride for our entire family, you said, 'Pay rent or move out in front of everyone.' That wasn't a joke, Mom and Dad. That was a mirror reflecting everything I've gone through in over 20 years of living in that house." I paused, looked at them, and gave a small smile. "Thank you for giving me the reason to finally start living my own life." The room fell silent. My father stared at the floor, his jaw tight. My mother pressed her lips together, her eyes darting as if searching for a reasonable response, but there wasn't one. Neither of them could deny what I had just said, nor could they turn back time to fix it. But I wasn't done. I stood, walked over to the bookshelf, and pulled a cream-colored envelope from the drawer. I set it on the table and slid it toward them. "Do you know what paid for this house?" They glanced at each other, but didn't answer. I opened the envelope, revealing a copy of my grandmother's will, clearly stating she had left her entire savings to me, not to be divided with anyone else. She knew exactly how I'd been living in that house. She wanted me to have a safe start, and she trusted me to protect it. That's why you never knew until today. My mother's face went pale, and my father sat frozen, his hand resting on the envelope without opening it. No one said another word. I slid the envelope back into the drawer where it belonged. "I think we've said enough for today. Thank you for stopping by." They left slowly, walking through the white gate without looking back. I stood on the porch, watching them go, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. It was the first time I had said everything out loud, and the first time I realized their silence no longer held any power over me. After that confrontation, my parents left my house with stiff expressions, without a single goodbye. But their silence that day wasn't like the sulky standoffs of the past. There was no sudden outburst, no barrage of accusations right away. It was a different kind of quiet, as if they were holding something back to unleash later. I didn't think much of it. In my mind, the conversation was over, and I had closed the book on a lifetime loop of unfairness. But just a week later, I realized that silence had only been a retreat time for them to prepare another blow. One Saturday morning, as I was making coffee, I got a message from a mutual family friend. "Emily, are you okay? I just overheard your mom talking to Mrs. Linda at the farmer's market. Not sure if I should believe it." I frowned slightly and replied, "What did she say?" A moment later, another message came in, short and sharp. that you stole money from the family, and that you kept an inheritance that was supposed to belong to Ryan. My stomach dropped, and I gripped my mug so tightly I nearly spilled the coffee. Before I could fully process it, that afternoon a relative from another state called to ask what was going on, because she'd heard my mother lament that I had abandoned the family in their time of need, forgotten the debt of being raised, and only thought about myself. My cousin went on to say my mother had described in detail how I had secretly taken the inheritance our grandmother had left for both of us, and used it all to buy a house, leaving Ryan with nothing. I sat there in my chair, listening as each word landed like a chunk of ice in my throat. Not only was it a lie, but they had turned the story into a perfectly crafted script in which I was the selfish, ungrateful villain. I began piecing together fragments from different sources. A few old neighbors mentioned that my father had hinted Emily only got rich because of family money, not through her own work. A couple of my mother's former coworkers said she had cried to them about how her daughter no longer wanted to be part of the family. The goal was crystal clear: they wanted me under community pressure, subject to judgmental stares, to make me feel guilty enough to come back and help them. At the same time, they wanted to chip away at my credibility with anyone who could influence my career, especially now that I had just started a new job. At first, I was so angry I wanted to drive straight to the old house, confront them face to face, and demand answers. But then I realized that if I reacted in anger, they would use that very reaction to prove I was the disrespectful child they had always quietly implied I was. I needed a different approach, calm, evidence-based, and definitive. I began gathering everything. First were my bank statements, proving I had paid for electricity, water, internet, insurance, and a long list of other expenses for the old house over the past 3 years, all under my name. I tracked down service contracts, monthly payment receipts, saving both PDF copies and printed hard copies. Next, I reached out to people who had overheard my parents speaking badly about me, asking them to recount exactly what they'd heard and to either sign a statement or send me a written message I could keep as evidence. A few were hesitant, but when I explained that I only wanted to protect my reputation and wouldn't drag them into any conflict, they agreed to help. I also contacted a lawyer, an old friend of my grandmother's, to ask about cases involving defamation and slander. He advised me to keep gathering evidence, especially text messages or emails containing false claims, because they could be used to demand a public apology or even take legal action if necessary. In doing all this, I realized something. I was no longer bound by the feeling that I owed my parents anything. In the past, every time they hurt me, I found some excuse to let it go, thinking it was just family matters. But when your family is willing to fabricate stories to destroy your reputation, you have to understand that the boundaries are gone and you have no obligation to keep silent. Step by step, I pieced together the full picture. A deliberate, fabricated narrative designed to create social pressure that would push me back into my old role of compliance. They thought I wouldn't dare fight back because, after all, we're blood. They were wrong. I organized every document into a black binder, labeling the front cover with a single word: truth. As I closed it, I knew it was time not just to defend myself, but to show them the cost of trying to drag me back into the cycle of injustice I had already broken free from. And this time, I would leave them no way out. The first thing I did was draft a long letter addressed to people with influence in the community, longtime neighbors, family friends, a few local business owners, and even some members of the neighborhood council. I began the letter with a note of thanks for their concern, then went straight to the point. I laid out, in clear terms, the false information my parents had been spreading, along with evidence for each claim. Every payment for electricity, water, internet, all printed and marked with exact dates was included. Every homeowner's insurance bill, every maintenance fee, all in my name for the past 3 years. I attached written statements from those who had personally heard the slander directly from my parents, with their permission, of course. My tone remained entirely calm, with no insults or personal attacks, just the facts, leaving them to compare for themselves against what they had been told. After sending the letters, I moved on to the second step, writing a public post on my personal social media. I spent the entire evening refining each sentence so it would be direct but never slip into negative emotion. I began by briefly recounting my journey, becoming financially independent from the moment I started college, working while studying, still sending money home to support the family despite receiving no support in return. I listed a few specific examples not to complain, but to illustrate the pattern of disregard and exploitation I had endured. Then I stated plainly that recently, my family had been spreading false information, and here was the evidence for people to judge for themselves. I ended the post with a firm declaration. I have stopped all financial support for my family as of this month and will not resume it. This decision does not come from hatred, but from the need to protect myself from a cycle of injustice that has gone on far too long. Family should be a place of mutual respect. When that no longer exists, I choose to set boundaries. The post quickly drew many comments and messages of support. Some expressed shock at how the truth completely contradicted the story they had heard before. Others quietly sent words of encouragement. I read them all, but I didn't get pulled into arguments. My only goal was for my message to be heard and understood. Next, I moved on to the financial retaliation, quiet but devastatingly effective. I went through every service still under my name that my old family was using. My father's car insurance, my mother's gym membership, the premium cable subscription, even the heating system maintenance plan I had signed up for so they wouldn't be left freezing in the winter, all of it was canceled in a single afternoon. I also contacted the bank to transfer ownership of a few small savings accounts and investments in my name, making sure they could not be accessed or used by anyone but me. Finally, I carried out the step that would sever all ties completely. I blocked my father, my mother, and Ryan's phone numbers. No texts, no calls, no open channel for them to slip through with half-hearted excuses or apologies. I sent a separate, brief message to a few relatives I still had good relationships with, informing them that I would no longer be attending any family events and asking them to respect this decision. Most responded with understanding, a few expressed regret, but still wished me happiness. When everything was done, I sat down at my desk and stared at my computer screen, feeling an odd mix of exhaustion and relief. I knew what I'd done would create a distance that could never be mended, but I also knew it was the only path to protecting myself. And most importantly, this time I was the one who decided where it ended, not anyone else. In the weeks after I struck back, things began to change not only in my own life but also in the old house I had left behind. Messages and emails from people who used to be my parents' friends and neighbors came less frequently, but whenever they did, they carried the same theme. There's a lot of tension at your old place. One longtime neighbor told me that since I had made the truth public, many in the community had started keeping their distance from my parents. The lies they had spread had been dismantled with clear, undeniable evidence, leaving them little room to justify themselves. The polite nods in the grocery store had turned into cold glances, and the once lively chatter at the farmer's market had dwindled to a few brief, perfunctory exchanges. Financially, the impact was even heavier. My canceling every service in my name and cutting off all support meant the bills for electricity, water, internet, insurance, everything began piling up. My parents, so used to those expenses being quietly taken care of, without worry, now scrambled to figure things out. I heard that, to pay the electric bill before it was shut off completely, they had to borrow from a relative. Ryan, the younger brother who had always been endlessly indulged, was forced to drop out mid-semester and take a part-time job at an auto repair shop. This sparked a new wave of arguments. My father insisted my mother should persuade me to come back and help so Ryan could continue school, while my mother blamed my father for going too far during my graduation dinner and driving me to cut ties so decisively. These tensions quickly shattered the united family facade they had tried to maintain. Relatives who still spoke to me said dinners at the old house were now filled with either silence or arguments. The relationship between my parents and their remaining child had begun to crack as well, with Ryan feeling abandoned after growing used to constant favoritism. I didn't take pleasure in knowing they were struggling, but I also didn't feel guilty. Everyone was simply reaping what they had sown. As for me, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I started my job at the tech company, joining a team of energetic and professional colleagues. Within just a few months, I was entrusted with leading an important project, something I might not have felt confident enough to accept before, but now, freed from the constant drain of family conflict, I could give it my full attention. I attended workshops, connected with like-minded people, and quickly built a new professional network. Outside of work, I devoted more time to hobbies I had once neglected. On weekends, I planted more flowers in the backyard and learned to cook more complex Italian dishes from the cookbook my grandmother had left me. I began a personal project, writing a blog about my journey to independence and setting boundaries in toxic relationships. What started as a small personal outlet unexpectedly drew interest from strangers who had also experienced being exploited within their own families. They sent messages of gratitude, saying my story had given them courage. Life in my new home brought me a feeling I hadn't known in all of my 23 years, the freedom of being unbound. Every time I locked the door in the morning or stepped back inside at night, I knew this was a place where every decision was mine. No more pointed reminders, no more watchful stares or sighs of disapproval. Just quiet space, the smell of morning coffee, and plans for a future I chose for myself. Looking back, I realized that cutting ties wasn't just about ending a relationship, it was about creating space for better things to enter. And this time, that space would be filled with what I chose, not what someone else imposed on me. That night, the air was clear and cool. I sat on the wooden chair out on the balcony, a thin blanket draped over my shoulders, a cup of hot chamomile tea in my hands. Below, the city lights stretched out like an artificial galaxy, blinking and breathing slowly with the rhythm of the night. On the small table beside me, my first work contract with the new company still bore its crisp folds. I opened it, letting my eyes run over each clause, each signature. Not because I didn't already know it by heart, but because of the comfort it brought me, a small document, yet proof that everything was now in my hands. I leaned back in my chair, letting my mind drift through the years before this. The times I was told to give up my own room for my brother. The dinners when I came home from long shifts exhausted, only to pull out my wallet to pay the bills while hearing my father say, "You're strong. You can handle it." The holidays and birthdays where my gifts were secondhand while Ryan unwrapped something brand new. And the mocking remark at my graduation dinner. "Now you're old enough to pay rent or move out." Each memory appeared vividly, as if it had happened just yesterday. But unlike before, I could see them now without that suffocating weight in my chest. I had broken free from that cycle, and more than that, I had carved out a new path for myself. I know some people will say cutting off your family is too extreme. But they haven't lived this story. They don't understand what it feels like when every achievement you make is diminished with, "You can take care of yourself," while every demand from them comes wrapped in the label of responsibility, one you are never allowed to refuse. When family uses guilt, or even slander, to drag you back into a position of compliance, silent endurance only allows the abuse to continue. You can't expect them to change if you never draw the line. A boundary is a declaration. I deserve respect, and holding that boundary to the very end is one of the deepest acts of self-love. I once believed that blood was an unbreakable bond, that no matter what, I had to maintain contact and endure. But I came to realize that blood does not excuse disrespect. And sometimes, cutting ties is the only way to find true peace. The night breeze gently stirred the lavender in the pots, its soft fragrance mingling with the air. I closed the contract, took a sip of tea, and let myself quietly savor the moment. No more relentless calls with demands, no more scrutinizing eyes, only the slow, steady beat of my heart, reminding me that I had chosen right. From here on, every road I take will be one I choose, no one else. If you're listening to this story and see yourself in it, disrespected, neglected, or hurt by the very people who were supposed to protect you, remember that your worth is not determined by how they treat you. You have the right to set boundaries, the right to say enough without feeling guilty. Loving yourself is not selfish, it's how you protect yourself from cycles of injustice. Blood is not a free pass for others to disrespect you. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not to hold on, but to let go, walk away, and build a life where you are treated with the respect you deserve. I'll see you in the next story.